Welcome to Kamaudacity. So this is where we talk about issues that affect us generally, but more specifically, issues that affect the family. This morning, we're going to be talking about latchkey children and their effect on the society, or how the fact of being a latchkey child has affected them. For those of you who are wondering, what on earth is a latchkey child? I've never heard about this term. What is it? Maybe you're busy doing a quick Google search. Was a latchkey child? Was I a latchkey child? Are my children latchkey children right now without me knowing it? Well, we're going to talk about that today. We're going to look at the definition historically and now, and the impact, implications that this has had. So the definition latchkey comes from the term latch, the terms latch and key, referring to the door of a house, right? So, some doors you might enter, you might gain access by way of a key, and other doors they use a latch, right? It's a little device that you put in. So it's how you gain entrance to your home. The latchkey child is a child who is the one who has access to the home for an extended period of time, unsupervised, probably with siblings, maybe a little older than him or herself, or younger than him or herself, or maybe all alone. In many cases, the child is all alone. So the child is returning to an empty house in the afternoons, usually after school or any other activity for the day, right? So the child comes home alone. And clearly, this by itself indicates that some problems can arise from the situation. The latchkey child, I think it was in the World War II era that the term and the commonplace situation, reared its head, because you had a lot of the men going off enlisted to fight wars. And this term, by the way, is an American term, right? So it was something that was observed in American society during and after World War II. So during the war, you had the men enlisted, they had to go to fight. And as a result of that, a lot of women had to enter the workforce. Prior to this, it was commonplace for the men to go to work and for the women to be the carers of the house, and the women would be there when the kids came home from school, right? So the child would come home to a meal prepared. The child would come home to rules and regulations. The child would come home to strict guidance, on how to spend the rest of the day, or even if they are let out, go and play, go and do this. There is you always know that mom is conscious of me being here. Mom is watching, even from a distance. I have a curfew at which time I need to get back to home, and I can't stray too far from home, right? So because mom is there. And Even though it's an American term, I'm sure it was a reality for many of us, even us growing up in the Caribbean. This was our reality. You came home to the extended family members. Mom is typically there, grandma is there, grandpa is there, aunties and uncles, or your cousins are there. So there is that protection there for the child. There is that supervision there for the child. Now, there was also a shift in the family structure as well. So we had moved away from the extended family structure with the aunties and uncles and grandparents and everybody living under the same roof. And we're now moving towards the nuclear family structure where it was mom, dad, and the kids. So with dad away at war or engaged in other things, and mom having to hold the family up, keep things afloat, and having to enter the workforce. Now the child comes home to an empty house, right? Or the child and brothers and sisters. So it could be anywhere from 3 years old, 6 years old, 10 years old. These children were of a wide range of ages, right? A wide range of mental development. But here they were being left to themselves. Here they were being left with all this time and being the ones who decided what was done with the time. As with most other things, good came from it and bad came from it, right? We're going to discuss as we go along because the generation whom we refer to as Generation X, them in particular, many of this generation would claim that the fact that they were mainly latchkey children, so these are persons who grew up in the 70s and 80s, a lot of these persons were latchkey children, and they actually attribute this to being in having a strong sense of independence, for their formative years to be spent with them given so much power over their destiny, right? They had to come home, they had to prepare meals for themselves, they had to whatever needed to be done during the time, whether it's homework, different types of recreational activities, it was up to them to decide. And so a lot of the Gen X, they feel that this is one of the main things that they can attribute to their sense of independence. And if you compare other generations that followed, in my opinion, and in the opinions of many persons who are observing the trend, the later generation of children who now we call the helicopter children, where the moms especially are more hovering and want to regulate and want to, in a sense, stifle. A lot of them, they don't have that strong sense of independence. They are at home longer. They are terrified of branching out on their own. In their 20s, early 30s, they still don't have a clear sense of what they want and how they are going to achieve it and to really step out on their own. Generation X and those prior, a lot of them were married, settled, raising families in their early 20s up, right, with that strong sense of independence and strong sense of purpose. And to a lot of this generation, that is attributed to the fact that they were left on their own for a good number of hours per day. And so it brought out that autonomy. It brought out that sense of, I am in charge of my destiny. And yes, there are negatives, which we'll talk about the negatives, but every generation has its negative, and every kind of situation will have its negative and positive. And when you compare the negatives and the positives between, let's say, the generation X's, who were more independent and given more leeway, to the helicopter generation, definitely, and strangely, the ones who are hovered over and stifled and supervised and managed, they tend not to fear as well, in terms of personal rigor, in terms of that fearlessness to go out and do what needs to be done and get what needs to be gotten, right? So it's something for us to think about. And I would want you to tell me if you identify yourself as having been a latchkey child when you were growing up. Did you find that you were spending several hours per day, particularly in the afternoon, so after school to evening, when your parents were coming in from work? So that's anywhere from 1 o'clock, depending on your locality, right? But anywhere from 1 p.m. to 6, 7, even 8 p.m., right? For some of us, that's the time our parents really could get to come home to us, right? If you identify yourself as a latchkey child, having been a latchkey child, do you think it made you a better person, a better adult, or were you worse for it, right? I want you to tell me that. And if you find that you are presently now raising who could be called the latchkey children, you find that you're at work, the other parent is at work, or the other parent is missing, there's no family structure there to support the kids when they come home, no aunties, no grandparents there. Maybe you can't afford after school care, or you can't afford, leaving a child at a nursery. And so maybe the arrangement is the child gets home, maybe the child is dropped home or walks home or takes the bus home, and the child is there from that time until you get home, whatever hour of the evening. If that is a situation with you, does it pull on your guilt? Do you feel guilty at all, or do you feel very pragmatic about it to say, well, this is what it is? We just have to do what needs to be done. And do you worry about the safety of your child, right? Do you worry about the legality of what you are doing? Have you even looked into, is this legal, what I'm doing? Am I allowed to leave my child at X age all by himself or all by herself? If the police were to get wind of what I am doing, is it something that I could be charged for? Is it something where my child could be taken from me if it is found out that this is what is up, right? Am I really exposing my child to unnecessary harm? If others who are watching find out that this is the case, my child is there all by himself. We all know the movie Home Alone, right? We're familiar. We know of this happening. If it's not in our home, we definitely know of it happening around, right? Is it something we should be concerned about as a society, especially now with our kids now have access to the internet. The child may not be able to use a device at school, but after school, the child may more than likely have a phone, tablet, laptop, and depending on how vigilant we are as parents, the child might have access to the internet and be able to, once internet access is available, that's a slippery slope, right? That can go in all directions very quickly and can be very, very negative. We all know that, right? So, in terms of the legality, because it's an American term, so we're thinking in terms of the American setting, the legality depends on the state, really. But in most states, there is no minimum age where you can be prosecuted for leaving a child. However, if something were to happen to that child, then in retrospect, it could be considered that you were negligent and you did not put things in place to ensure the safety of the child, and the child could be taken from you. So it's a tricky thing. It's like you will get the blind eye as long as everything stays good. But if something goes wrong, then it will be taken into account that this child is underage and under the age of 18, right? We know that we have teenagers who babysit and all of that. Once the going is good, you won't come under scrutiny. But if something goes wrong, you have to bear that in mind, that these are minors and their parents have responsibility for them. If you as a parent can't physically be there, then you have the responsibility to ensure that some kind of adult supervision is given. No, there's a thing with the latchkey child. There's a situation that involves the library, especially in the historical sense, where, okay, so parents were saying, all right, we can't be there at home with the child. We don't necessarily want the child to be at home by himself or herself. So here's a great idea. How about the child goes to the library, right? This was back in the day when the library was a popular place for children and adults to be. It's no longer popular. We all know with the internet and all of that, right? But the libraries are still there. They do exist, and they are places. They are actual physical places where children can go. So for a lot of parents, they thought of the library as a solution, right? You don't have to pay, and the librarians are there. And so if you say to the child, all right, after school, go to the library. Don't go home to be by yourself. Go to the library where at least we know that adults are there. But for the parents who did this and the parents who are doing it now, you still have to remember that the librarians are not responsible for your children, right? And this is something, it is something you probably never thought about, but librarians have actually come out to complain about this, right? Sometimes the things that don't affect us, we tend to gloss over. We don't even think about it. But when you are in the situation and it affects you directly, then you see the difference, the impact that it can have. So here we had librarians who found themselves being required by these parents to be essentially babysitters, right? And they know this was not part of their job description. Their job is to guide you in terms of selecting books and ensure that you keep the peace in the library and stuff like that. But here they found themselves in the afternoons babysitting these kids and all the problems that come with that. And they found the problem to be so pervasive that they had to come out and take a stand, right? So this is back in the 80s, 90s, and so on, when the libraries were popular, right? But even now, if you decide that, okay, this might be a solution for us, just remember, you can't transfer your responsibility to a librarian. The fact that the child is at the library, the child is exposed to unscrupulous adults who could take advantage, who could lure your child away, just as how they use the internet to meet up, to lure children to certain places, and we all know what can come of that. It is not a safe thing for you to rely on the public library to babysit your child. We really need to, as adults, we need to put things in place to keep our children safe, right? To keep them, to ensure that they have the supervision that they need. If we can't provide it physically, then we need to put things in place so that it is provided for them. So let's talk about now the impact, right? The impact that the Latchkey child has had on the child himself or herself and on the society. One of the main things, well, let's focus on the negative first, right? The negative impact that this can have. No, it depends on the age of the child, and it also depends on the personality of the child, right? So if you were like myself growing up and you found yourself alone for extended periods, you would consider that a blessing, right? For me, being an introvert, being someone who just wanted to be in a quiet space and be able to roam about the yard and look at the worms and, or do some writing. If you're a quiet child like me, then for you, given 3, 4, 5, 6 hours in the evening of being alone, that was heaven. But if you're an extroverted child and you find yourself having to be locked away in a house all by yourself, especially if you don't have access to devices or recreational activities, then it can cause loneliness in the child. And especially if this goes on for extended periods. All right, so that's an airplane passing overhead, right? So especially if this goes on for years, right? The child can develop loneliness and extreme boredom, and depression can come from that, especially in children like under 10 years of age. Fear is another thing. If you grow up constantly being afraid, for these little kids, 3 to 10 years old, alone in this place, and especially if they're watching certain movies, and they might think that certain things will happen to them if they still believe in monsters, or the monsters that are real, which we know are more detrimental. So they grow with this fear in them. They grow feeling unprotected. They grow feeling that adults cannot be relied upon to keep them safe. And so their safety is in their hands as children. This can have a severe psychological effect on a child. And if the child grows with this, it can go over into adulthood. As we all know, these psychological conditions, some of them are born in childhood. I love the poem, children live what they learn, children learn what they live. And children need security. Children need to feel that they are safe. They need to feel that they can trust at least the adults in their, in their little realm. We know we can't raise them to think that all the adults out there are trustworthy. There's the definite danger in that. But children need to know that at least the adults in their little realm can be trusted, can be relied upon to keep them safe, right? So we can have in later life these children experiencing depression and experiencing a sense of never feeling safe, even as adults. They can carry this over. There's also, with the latchkey child, there's also a difference in terms of social standing, right? Social hierarchy. Because the phenomenon of the latchkey child, especially in America, it was mainly seen with middle income and upper class families. The lower class families tended to remain extended, right? So, as strange as it seems, the higher educated the parents were, the more the possibility that the child would be a latchkey child. It seems counterintuitive, right? It's counterintuitive. You would think it would be the other way around, but no. The more educated the parents, the more you had both parents being in the workforce. And so the more chance that the child would end up being at home alone. And the problems that stem from it also had to do with class, right? For the teenagers in the upper to middle class, the middle to upper class, so like from 13 to adolescence, the problems associated with them in terms of latchkey children, so they would be more prone to promiscuity, sexual promiscuity, using hard drugs or smoking and experimenting with alcohol at a younger age, and being more susceptible to peer pressure, right? In the middle to upper income age brackets. The problems, not that the problems didn't exist for the lower income kids, but the problems were more severe for the middle to upper income kids. So it's like a rich kid problem, right? It's even the helicopter kid phenomenon. It's more associated with middle to upper income brackets. And because of us also misconduct, right? And extending that into criminality, even, the problems were more with middle to upper income. So, what he found with the lower income families, even though we may have more paternal abandonment of children and so on, because the unemployment is higher in this bracket, unemployment rate is higher, so you would still have the parent at home, maybe living off welfare or just unemployed and depending on someone else, but at least there. You get what I'm saying? So the lower income kids often would still have someone in the household. There would be latchkey kids from this bracket, but not as many as the other income brackets, right? So those are the negative effects of latchkey children. In terms of the positive, though, and like I said, the generation that is most associated with the latchkey child, which is the Generation X, they actually claim this as a big plus for them, right? Because they believe that having been alone for so long and having been, it's like they had to become resourceful. They had, not just in terms of finding things to do with the time, but they also had to develop that mental fortitude just to handle the fact of being alone, the fact that, okay, I have to keep myself safe, right? And they don't have a notion of blaming their parents. These are adults now who, they it's like they just understood the situation for what it was and realized that even they as kids had to do their part. So it's like the society on a whole was going through this upheaval, was going through this crisis, and the children themselves understood, or it was explained to them, that hey, every member of the family has to fill in, every member of the family has to step up and make this work, right? So if it meant that mom had to start teaching these kids from earlier, all right, so this is how you prepare dinner. The child might be the one cooking for everybody else who's going to come home exhausted. In a lot of times, it was a child who was cooking, 8, 9, 10, and up, in the kitchen preparing meals, or maybe there was some preparation done before the family left in the morning, and then the child would come home and do whatever was necessary to get everything together and have a meal ready. Or maybe the child just prepared the meal for himself or herself and the siblings, right? If it meant getting the homework done, you just had to get yourself in that frame of mind that, okay, this has to be done. And it engendered a sense of being able to rely on yourself and thinking for yourself, not being able to run to somebody every minute. Can you do this for me? Mom, can you fix this? Dad, can you show me this? The child had to step up to it. When it came to the older siblings having to take care of the little ones, so you might find yourself 10 years old, at 10 years old, and you have a 3-year-old, you have a 5-year-old sibling whom you had to probably still be changing diapers depending on the situation. Have to make sure they eat, have to make sure they do what needs to be done in terms of their schoolwork, because a lot of times, when the parents came home, this child had to be accountable. The child had to show, okay, I did it, I did this, I did that, I did my part. We're talking about from the rigorous war years, post-war years, and coming up into as we said, the last generation who really went through this as a common thing was Generation X, right? So late 80s, early 90s, these children were accountable. You had to give an account of how you occupied your time and what you got done. And so you became independent. You had things in place in your mind to say, okay, by the time I am a certain age, I need to do this, or I need to be able to do this. And these are people who, a lot of them, like I said, they started their families in their early to some of them even as young as 18, 19. And this was not haphazard. This is something where you set in place, this is what I want. You get your partner, you settle, you start raising your kids. But there's another side to this. Maybe a lot of the helicopter parents now came from the Generation X's, who decided that I'm not going to raise my kids the way my parents raised me. I'm not going to raise my kids to come home to an empty house. I'm not going to raise my kids to have to fend for themselves in case there was an intruder, right? So it's like it's a cycle. It's a cycle, and it's difficult to determine which is better. It really all boils down to the individual, because there is a way to look at parenting. You see, it's almost as if it doesn't matter what kind of parenting you do, the children will always rebel against it. So if you are a strict parent, the child will come and say, oh, you were too strict, I didn't get any freedom, I didn't get to do this, and because of that I am XYZ. If you were a slack parent, the child will come and say, oh, you were too slack, you gave me too much freedom, you made this happen to me, you made that. So it's like no matter what kind of parenting you choose, your child will object. And for those of you who are parents, you can tell me how you feel about this. So we really just have to, as individuals, decide on what our parenting style will be and just stick to that and stand your ground and be able to defend it, and just know that your kids are going to object to it when they come of age, and they are going to choose their own parenting style, and their kids are going to object to that as well, right? So maybe a lot of the who we now call the helicopter parents, they want to ensure everything, every second of the day is planned out for the child. They want to be there. They're at the soccer matches. They sit and wait for dance class to be over. They're there right through karate class. They do everything. They make sure if they physically can't be there, they get a driver to pick up the child and take the child here and wait for the child, or they get a nanny, or they get a nursery for the child to stay. At no point during the day is the child left unsupervised. So they may have been raised, a lot of them may have been raised as latchkey children and decided that they didn't like the experience, they weren't the better for it, and they don't want that for their child. But this is just the nature of life. This is just how things go, right? It can go any direction, east or west. You can go through something, and it's the same with men who were abandoned by their dads. Some of them were all the worse for it, and they came out of it with really negative attitudes, and they came out of it becoming just the same as the dad who abandoned them. They come and they abandon their kids. They come and they don't play a role in their kids' lives. They come and they do the same kind of behavior to women. And then you have the guys who were abandoned by their dads, and because of it, they make a very strong and determined decision that they will never allow this to happen to their children. And they ensure that certain things are in place because they don't want to put another child through what they went through. So it can go any which way, it can go in any direction, and it really boils down to a personal experience, right? It really boils down to you as an individual. If you find yourself in this situation, what do you make of it? What do you take away from it? And how are you going to project that as you go forward? Right? So I would really want to know. I personally, I was not a latchkey child, even though I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Growing in the Caribbean, our family structure was more extended. It's only nowadays you'd find the nuclear family, starting to be more dominant. But especially in the rural areas, here in Jamaica, where I grew up, the extended family was the norm. And so, you came with sometimes we even came home from lunch. So you went to school, and sometimes even lunchtime, you didn't have lunch at home. You ran home during lunchtime. Your hot meal was there for you to eat, and you'd run back to school. When you came home in the afternoons, the adults who went out to work, yeah, they would still be at work, but grandma would be home, grandpa would be home, some of your aunties and uncles, depending on their ages, mom many times would be home, right? And depending on what your parents did as their jobs, they're likely to be within the vicinity as well, right? Because if your parent had let's say your parent had a trade, they would likely be at home or in the environs performing that trade, right? Or maybe it was a case where they didn't have work at that time. So let's say you were a mason. It's not every single day you had work. When you had a trade, you really waited until someone needed that service, and then you would go. So many times you'd go home, your dad would be there as well, your mom would be there. And if not, you had tons of um, cousins, your siblings would be there, your grandparents especially. In the extended family, the grandparents would play the role of caregiver when the kids came home from school. And they would also, within that role, they would be guiding, they would be transmitting the folk knowledge, right? The folk knowledge, the little sayings that they would have, the little way that they would guide you. And even when you were out there, because the play was a communal thing. for the kids. You came home from school, you didn't have to be pent up in a house playing by yourself and having imaginary friends. Play was a community thing for us in the Caribbean growing up. Everybody came home. The kids from over here, the kids from over there, the kids from down the road, the kids from up the hill, and then everybody would meet in a central place, and you would be there in the dirt. You would be there running up and down. You'd be there playing ring games. You would be there playing dolly house together, and it's every neighbor from the corner of their eye would be watching every child, because the children belong to the community. And if you did wrong as a child, you'd be reprimanded by every adult who saw the action or heard about the action, as well as your parents when you get into the home. But every adult from the corner of their eye would be watching every child. It's a communal thing. And so we didn't have much of this problem in the Caribbean. For me, growing up, I would like you to tell me your experience, but I know for me, we didn't have that issue. You came home from school in the afternoon, you had something to eat, and then you went into the commons, the common area, and you played. you know, you, you played for the rest of the daylight hours. You were not even in the home, inside the home. You were outdoors. You were taking in that sun. You were running up and down and building your muscles and being healthy, breathing in the outside air and interacting with your friends, quarreling with your friends, learning how to solve disputes, learning how to share, learning how to cooperate, learning how to collaborate to create things. All of this was part of your nurturing, your communal nurturing as a Caribbean child. Nowadays, where the extended family is not so common, the nuclear family is more dominant. Grandma is very likely not available. Grandpa is very likely not available. So the child finds himself or herself closed off, grilled in, because crime has also increased. And so you have to literally be grilled in, iron bars. So you're in prison at home. And now, in the information age, these children have access to all that is available. Being curious, this comes with the territory that they are. Children are curious. They will want to know, especially things that are forbidden to them. They will want to know. And if they have access to the information, they are going to gain access to it, right? And so that's a problem for this generation now. It's a problem for the parents who are raising this generation now, the internet age. And so we have to talk to our children, particularly the ones who are left alone for extended periods, if there's no other way. Because for me, once there's a way for you to, maybe there are after school activities they can sign them up for, so that they can be at school for an extended period, doing what you know to be constructive things, or even activities outside of the school, right? At the YMCA or something. that you can get them engaged in. For us here, like in Jamaica, we have the junior center, right? We have activities at the Institute of Jamaica and so on. We can get them signed up to participate in, to extend that period of supervision, right? Depending on how old the child is, they might still be able to be left at the nursery. But if you can't do any of that, maybe for financial reasons or whatever the reason, if you are going to have the child at home for an extended period each day, ensure that you talk to the child a lot. Ensure that you find ways, psychological ways of assessing as you go along. Where is this child at emotionally? Where is this child at mentally? Who are the friends? Who are the influences? Who are the peers? If there are devices that the child uses, and you can put certain blocks, certain limitations to what they have access to, then by all means, go ahead and do that, just to ensure. I know some parents, they're able to set up the device. I'm not techie, so if you're probably laughing at me right now, but I know of parents who are able to link the devices so that they can actually see the screen. Whatever, when they choose to, they can share their child's screen and see what the child is doing. Or it's a case where they can just monitor the whatever the child has gained access to for a period of time. They can monitor the search history, or they can put bans on certain sites, whatever it is. Whatever it is that you can do to make your child's experience a safe one, right? And don't feel any guilt if you have no option. This is just the way it is. You just have to be pragmatic. Don't feel any guilt about doing this, and actually understand that you could be doing a lot of good also for your child in allowing the child to have this level of independence. Is just that you still have to do some monitoring and still put certain things in place. Also put things in place in terms of their health. Don't leave them unsupervised with a fridge loaded with, or a pantry loaded with junk. Because if you leave it up to kids, they're going to eat chocolate for dinner, chocolate for lunch, chocolate for breakfast, plus snacks in between. If you leave it up to kids, there are just certain things they're going to gravitate towards. So if you leave a pantry full of these things and you're not there, they're going to indulge, and you're going to have obese children on your hands. So if you know that they're going to be left alone for a certain number of hours, ensure that there are healthy things for them to eat, or pre-package their meals to say, okay, when you're at home, eat this, then eat this. So you have to put some regulation in place, or you're going to have obese, diabetic, hypertensive kids on your hands. So there are certain responsibilities you need to take, right? But just remember the Generation X, who are referred to as the least parented, the least nurtured children in history. This is something you can research on, the impact of Generation X. They are considered to be the least parented and the least nurtured, but also the most independent. So you're not necessarily doing your child a disservice by allowing them the space You just have to put certain things in place to ensure that they are still safe, they are still secure, and emotionally they're not struggling with issues like fear and abandonment and loneliness and depression, right? You just have to keep gauging them as you go along to see how they're developing, how they're managing the freedom, how they're using the recreation time, ensure that their academic work is up to speed, right? Because especially for the latchkey kids in the low income area, this was one of the main concerns for them. The academics was really plummeting. So as long as you make sure that you put checks and balances in place, it's not necessarily a bad thing for our children, depending on their age, of course. For me, the cutoff age will be 10, for me personally, right? Below 10, I would not be leaving a child alone for any period of time. But that's my personal take. It's something for you to consider, and you also need to consider the legalities in your area in case something happens, and most importantly, to prevent any bad thing from happening. But put your checks and balances in place and do what you have to do. Talk to your child, let your child know what the situation is and what is required and what your standards are and what you will accept and what you won't accept, right? And this does not necessarily have to be a negative experience for your child. Until next week, when we talk about another important and interesting topic, this is Kama. Take care of yourself and have a wonderful week.